This video will show you how to add multiple dimensions to a chart. To begin, first add a chart to your dashboard. You can do this by dragging the chart component from the component panel into the dashboard. Resize the chart as desired by dragging on the resize handles, and move the chart to the desired position by dragging on the move handle. You can also press the arrow keys on the keyboard to move the chart. Let's begin by creating a simple chart with one dimension and one measure. This chart will display total versus state. To add the dimension, grab the state field and drag it to the x-axis in the chart editor, and then grab the total measure and drag that to the y-axis in the chart editor. This creates a chart that displays sum of total versus state. The dimension represents the grouping in the chart. In this case, the data in the chart is grouped by state. You can add additional dimensions to obtain additional levels of grouping. You can add these additional dimensions either to the x-axis, to the y-axis, or to the visual panel at the bottom. Let's look at all of these approaches. Let's consider grouping the data further by category. First, let's try adding the category field onto the x-axis. Drag the category field to the x-axis in the chart editor. Note that this breaks out the data by category in addition to by state. If you prefer to reverse the order of grouping so that the data is grouped first by category and then by state, simply reverse the order of the fields on the x-axis in the chart editor. Note that this is a scrolling chart, so there is a scroll bar at the bottom of the chart that will allow you to see all of the data. To make more of the data visible on the chart at the same time, you can always make the chart larger or add a selection component that will allow the user to narrow down the amount of data that is visible at a single time in the chart. Let's try another approach. Instead of putting the category field on the x-axis, so that we have two dimensions on the x-axis, let's consider putting the category field on the y-axis. Drag the category field now to the y-axis. Observe that the different categories are now displayed on the y-axis, and again we have a scrolling chart that breaks out the data into two levels of grouping by category and by state. Let's try a third approach. This time we'll add the category field into one of the regions in the visual panel at the bottom, for example, color. This now represents the category groups using color. This is a much more compact chart, no scrolling necessary, and allows the user to quickly see how the totals are distributed both by state and by category. You can also use the shape, size, and text regions at the bottom to represent these groups using different visual formats. For example, for a bar chart, the shape represents the fill within the bars, in this case the different categories being represented by different fills. The size represents the width of the bar, in this case the different categories being represented by different widths. And the text represents the different categories simply using their labels. Whichever representation you choose for this dimension, you can edit the properties of the display by pressing the Edit button to the right of the field name. In the case of color, this allows you to choose the different colors that are being used to represent the values. In some cases, you may not want any visual format to distinguish the different groups. In this case, you can use the Break By field in the data panel. If you add the category field into the Break By region, there is no visual formatting to distinguish the different category groups on the chart. However, when you move the mouse over a group, the tooltip will tell you which group it represents. In this case, the category of hardware. Of course, you can combine all of these approaches together to make more complex charts. For example, you can distinguish the different category groups by color. You can distinguish the different region groups by using the x-axis. And you can distinguish the different dates by using the y-axis. Keep in mind that the more dimensions that you add to a chart, the more complex the chart becomes, and potentially the more difficult it is for the user to understand the chart. Sometimes it is just better to create separate charts to represent your separate dimensions.